Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to set up your Raspberry Pi, get us started in headless mode using Ethernet. This means we're going to be connecting to it without a monitor or an extra mouse or keyboard, just with an Ethernet cable connected to our computer. We don't have to mess around with Wi-Fi, which is helpful if you're trying to do this on campus or somewhere else where the Wi-Fi is kind of restricted. So to do this, I'm going to be jumping in, assuming you have already downloaded an operating system from this site or somewhere else, but probably you should just stick with Raspbian. Probably this one, Raspbian Buster with desktop. Download that zip. You should get a .img file. Use some sort of flashing tool like Etcher. You can flash OS images to your SD card. So I already have this done, but I can just kind of show you what that would look like. If my thing opens, there it is. So I have my card plugged in. I would just select an image, click Raspbian Buster.img, and hit flash. I'm not going to do that. Mine's already flashed. That takes about 10 to 15 minutes. So once you have that, you should see something like this. Oh, something I forgot to mention is that this tutorial is for Windows only. We're going to make another one for Mac users, just because when it comes down to the networking, it gets pretty specific. As for actually flashing the card, that works on Mac as well. You can see there's installers for Mac and Linux and other operating systems as well. But from here on out, it's probably going to become very specific to Windows. So where was I? So the motivation behind all this is I drew a little diagram to kind of help us talk through this, since I can't really be showing you what I'm seeing on my desk right now. So we have a Raspberry Pi. If we want to start using it, we would have to use these little HDMI adapters, plug in a micro HDMI to a monitor, in the USB, plug in a mouse and a keyboard, and then we could start working on it. Even if you do have that stuff lying around your house, sometimes it's not very convenient when you just want to connect to it with your laptop or something. So that's what we're going to be doing. That's why it's called the headless start. If you think of the monitor as like the head of your computer, we're not going to be using it. It's just going to be kind of sitting there on its own, only plugged into the power, this cable right here, and a networking cable that will be plugged into our laptop. So to make this work, we're going to have to do some networking stuff, which unfortunately you haven't learned yet. You'll be learning in this class. So it's kind of a funny situation where we're going to have to use some concepts that you will be learning later to get set up in the class so that you can learn those concepts. So just disclaimer, if you don't understand any of the IP addressing or any of that things, no problem. We don't expect you to understand that just yet, but you should be able to follow along so you can get your Raspberry Pi up and working. So let's see, where are we? So the thing, sorry, I had to figure out what I was talking about. Two things that are preventing us from just plugging in our Raspberry Pi and starting is no network connection, and it's not default set to allow us to connect to it remotely. So we can fix the networking thing by plugging in this cable and doing the steps that I'll be showing in a bit. But to allow us to actually allow that connection to go through, we're going to use SSH. If you haven't heard of that yet, it is cryptographic network protocol for operating network, blah, 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 whatever. Allows us to remotely connect to our computer and just run commands from our own computer. This protocol is not enabled already. So what we're going to do to enable that is actually pretty simple. Right here, right here I have our SD card pulled up, this D drive. It has a bunch of nonsense stuff. So we're going to make a file on our computer. Don't do it on the actual disk because you might get some like permission errors. So just make a new file and just call it SSH, and then remove the file extension like that. Sure. Yeah, whatever. You can see I already had one, so I'm just going to get rid of that. So it's just an empty file. There's no file extension, just file called SSH. That's it. Nothing special to it. Pick that up and drag it over to your card. So now I have this SSH file right here. This file just tells the Raspberry Pi to allow SSH so that we can get into it. So pretty simple there. Now that we have that set up, that's all we really need to do to it. So we're just going to eject. And now that it's ejected, I'm going to pull this out of my computer, pull out the SD card from my little adapter thing, and plug it into the bottom of my Raspberry Pi. So I forgot to mention that right now, I'm actually not connected to the power. I've got my power over here or something. My power supply is just hanging out, it's not plugged in yet. But I did just put in my SD card right there, and my network cable is plugged in to my laptop through an adapter. Most likely you also don't have an adapter or a USB or Ethernet port on your laptop, so you'll be using an adapter, but mine works fine, so you should be fine too. So just some conceptual stuff. What we're going to be doing is we're going to share the connection between the Raspberry Pi and the laptop through the Wi-Fi of our laptop. So if I were to check out my connection right now, this is my IP at my house, and this is the router at my house. On campus, it's probably going to look like 10.37. something, with the router being 10.37.0.1. If you're at home, though, you'll probably have something like a 192. Anyway, so we're going to be sharing this connection through our laptop and going to be connecting to our Raspberry Pi. So let's check out some of our network settings right now. If you do view network connections, you should find something like this. You could also find it by just doing network status, clicking like Ethernet or Wi-Fi, one of the two, and do change adapter. Change adapter options. Gets you to the same screen. So right here, this is all our network connections I have on the computer right now. Wi-Fi connected to the network of my house. No, sorry, I'm going a little quick. If we right click here and do properties, we get some of the properties about our interface. If I click right here, Internet Protocol version 4, properties, you can see that it's just obtaining an IP address automatically from the router. So that's good. Don't want to mess with that. One thing we do want to change is the sharing tab. So like I said, we want to share our Ethernet connection to our Wi-Fi. So I'm going to click Allow other network users to connect through this computer's internet connection. I'm going to check this bottom one also just to be safe and click OK. So this little warning right here is just saying now that we're using internet connection sharing, our LAN adapter will be set to this IP address, which is that.137.1. So we're going to say yes, we do want to do that. If we go check out our Ethernet 2, you can see this says network cable unplugged. That's because my Raspberry Pi is not plugged in yet, so it doesn't think there's a full connection yet, which there isn't. You might only have one Ethernet if you don't have VirtualBox installed, so ignore this if you don't have it, but if you do have VirtualBox, just click disable so that you only have one Ethernet connection going on. So let's check out the properties. Once again, I did right-click properties, Internet Protocol version 4, properties, and just as that warning said, our LAN adapter has been set to 192.168.137.1. Okay, if we click OK, you may get a warning like this. If you do, just say no, like we don't want to deal with this just yet. If you don't, then you're fine. Let's just double check. Looks like we're good. I'm just going to click cancel, so I have to deal with that warning again. Okay, so, oops, sorry. One concept we will cover later in the class has to do with how IP addresses are assigned. It's a protocol called DHCP. So we are going to use that to use this interface to assign an IP to our Raspberry Pi. We don't know what it's going to be, but we're going to tell this little DHP server to assign it one. So you should go to DHP server, or not go there. I mean, if you want to copy this, you can, but just Google DHP server Windows. You should find this page, scroll to the bottom and click download the latest version. You should get a zip file. Let's see where mine is. yeah, DHP serve, you get a zip file like this. I already opened mine up. So I've got this file right here, or this folder. Inside we have these two executables that we're going to use to set it up. So I'm going to click dhcpwiz.exe, click next. And so here's our Ethernet 2. You may notice that the IP address is 0000, which is actually wrong, right? Because we just barely set it to 137.1. That's okay, it just hasn't taken change yet, even if we do refresh, because the network hasn't been plugged in yet. It hasn't really done anything yet. But that's okay, we'll just hit next. Or actually, we can just wait for a sec. So let's just go back, keep this as 00, just click cancel. I'm going to plug in the network cable so that we can get this connection filled. So my network cable is plugged into my Raspberry Pi, and now I'm plugging the Raspberry Pi power into my power strip. So the lights on my Raspberry Pi turned on. You can see this is connecting. It might go up and down for a bit. Kind of depends. Yeah, let's see, it kind of says unplugged for a bit, but it'll come back on. Okay, so now that we're connected, let's actually check out IP config again. So this is our Wi-Fi, and look, here is our Ethernet adapter on Ethernet 2. Looks like that's the IP, which is what we set it to. So things are looking good there. Now that we have this connection made, we're ready to set up our DHP server. So click dhcpwiz.exe. Next. Okay, so that looks like that got resolved. It used to be zeros, and now it's 192.168.137.1. So click next. Skip through this and click next. This should be autofilled for you, but if not, make it look like this. We're just saying we want all the computers that connect to this interface to have an IP address in this range, which is 192.168.137.1 to those three first numbers plus some other stuff. You shouldn't need to mess with these. I'm just checking them to make sure that it did automatically for us. If it didn't already add 888.8 as a DNS server, you can add that, even though I'm not actually positive it's necessary. So when that's done, click next. So this is like kind of like a configuration file, basically saves all the settings we just clicked. So we do want to overwrite the existing file, then click write. So it says the INI file has been successfully written. So we click next. If this doesn't say configured, mine already is configured because I've been playing around with this. Just click admin and then click configure. And then it should take you back to the screen and then say configured. Okay. So if you're not configured, click run DHCP server immediately and then finish. So that finished that DHCP whiz, and now it just kind of started up this exe right here, DHCP server, for us automatically. So we're good to go. Let's just click continue as tray app. So now if we click on our little tray, it looks like we have DHCP server running for us. I'm going to quit out of Slack real quick. Sorry, I have a timer running off real quick. One sec. I should edit this out of the video, but that would take too much time. Okay. So we have our DHCP, sorry, I can't say that. We have our DHCP server running. You can tell right there, just clicking on it. And so now, when we first plugged in our Raspberry Pi, the DHCP server wasn't running, so it wasn't able to get a connection. So I'm going to unplug my Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi doesn't really have a power button, so that's kind of how we turn it off and turn it on. It's just to unplug it. I recommend just plugging it from the power strip and putting it back in rather than taking the USB-C in and out, just because, I don't know, I get scared I'm going to like break the little motherboard thing. Okay, so I let it sit for a sec just to let it completely turn off. And now I'm plugging it back in. The lights are flashing up again. Double check, DHCP server is still running. Now I'm going to just do ipconfig again, just in case. I do that a lot, just kind of a weird habit, but it looks like our Wi-Fi is still good and our Ethernet is still good. So if everything worked correctly, because our DHCP server is running on this interface, it automatically assigned an IP address for our Raspberry Pi right here. You see we have that little pound sign right there is because we don't know exactly what IP address was given to the Raspberry Pi. So this is where we use a network scanner. I use this one called Advanced IP Scanner, a very popular one on Linux machines. It's also available to Windows. It's called Nmap. I downloaded it recently and I feel like it gave me a bunch of other garbage I didn't want downloaded, so I got rid of it. But it's a pretty good one. I'm sure there's a lot of other ones out there. Anyway, that's one I have open. So let me actually close that out. So Advanced IP Scanner. And this is the range. So I'm going to do, we know it's going to start something at 192.168.137.1. And it's going to be between 192.168.137.255, somewhere in between there. So I'm going to click scan and just let it do its thing for a bit. It shouldn't take that long since there's only 200 or so possible devices on this network. So you can see it found my laptop. I'm the router right now, 137.1. And look at this, raspberrypi.mshome.net with 192.168.137.125. So sweet. It looks like it did get connected. Now we are ready for the next step, which is actually to connect to it. Just for fun, let's just make sure that we actually can communicate with it with the simple ping command. So 192.168.137.125. And looks like it's being able to send packets and the packets are being returned. So great, we have a connection. So we are ready to SSH into it. I'm just going to bring the old command. So we can either do SSH pi at this IP. So pi is the default username. Or you could do SSH this and then say .l for login pi. Either one. I generally do this one. I think it's a little cleaner to look at, but either one works fine. So we are going to log in to this IP with this username. So enter. Oops, why aren't you on? There we go. You might get something like this. It just says, we don't really know what this host is, but we know what it is. So we're just going to say, yes, we can trust it. So now it's saying, so what is the password for the username pi at this computer? The default password, if you don't already know, is raspberry. So RASPBERRY, raspberry. And bam, we're connected. If you're not familiar with Linux, this is just the command line interface. It's just a terminal. We can run commands like list items. We could change directories, all that nonsense. One thing, let's run ifconfig. Looks like on our Ethernet, we are connected to the IP. Obviously, it's that one because that's how we got into this computer. And then we have our Ethernet, or sorry, this is the MAC address for our Wi-Fi, and our Wi-Fi is not on. So you can tell we're connected directly through Ethernet. So that's all very cool. What was the last thing I wanted to check? Oh, so if you're not very comfortable with just the command line interface, we can use a protocol called VNC, which stands for Virtual Network Computing. So if you've ever used remote desktop on Windows, it's very similar. So to allow this, we're going to go sudo rasb config. This gives us a little menu thing. we're going to go to interfacing options, click VNC. I'm just clicking enter to select those options. So would you like VNC server enabled? I click left arrow, enter for yes, enter. One interesting thing is that because it hasn't ever been plugged into a monitor yet, it sometimes doesn't know how to display anything. So one little trick we can do is click advanced options, resolution, and then just change it from the default. It really doesn't matter which one. They're not going to display perfectly on your screen, so I'm just going to do this one. So resolution is set to something other than the default, enter. To exit this, I'm going to hit right arrow. Now I'm down in this bottom menu, and then I can just hit finish. So because we made changes, we do need to reboot, so yes. You can see that the connection to this IP was closed because we turned it off. So if the computer's off, we can't be connected to it anymore. So let's give it a second to reboot. We can ping it. Looks like it hasn't rebooted yet because the pings aren't coming back. Looks like the request timed out. I'm just going to let it run, see what happens. Nope. Oh, it looks like we got one reply at the end. Okay, try it again. There we go. So the thing's back up. If we wanted to, we could SSH into it again, but we want to use the desktop, maybe because we want to click on some stuff. I don't know. So to use VNC, we're going to use the viewer. So this may be familiar to some people, but generally a very common architecture for these protocols is like a server and a client. So we just started the VNC server on the Raspberry Pi, and now we're going to use the VNC Viewer or the VNC client on our computer. So you can just go to this site, Real VNC. There's a couple other ones if you want to find another one, and just download VNC Viewer. So I already have mine downloaded. I'm going to hit yes. You can see I've already been playing around with this. I'm just going to delete these just to clean it up a little. So we know the Raspberry Pi is right here. I'm just going to copy that. So I'm going to connect to any VNC servers on this address. And it says yes. So we're going to use Raspberry Pi's default username, which is Pi, and the password Raspberry, just like that. And OK. And look at that. We are connected. I'm just going to click out of these warnings. You can't go full, I mean, you can go full screen, but it's kind of annoying. That's what I was kind of mentioning with the pixels aren't perfect on the resolution. But I can make this window just a little bigger. And here we are, we're on the Raspberry Pi. If we opened our terminal, you'll see we get the same stuff we were getting before. Pretty cool, but we also have, you know, our GUI, we have our folders, we have the internet if we want. It's a little slow. I mean, the Raspberry Pi only has about 1 gig of RAM, or at least mine does. Let's get rid of that. Let's see how our internet's doing. Super slow, but it is working. So some of the tutorials out there on how to connect to your Raspberry Pi headless mode with Ethernet doesn't give you access to internet, which is kind of pointless, right? So if I can do pinggoogle.com, I'll get a reply. So if I'm working on my Raspberry Pi and I want to use Vim or something, I can go and install programs and stuff, which generally speaking is going to happen. So that's why it's important to do our steps of connecting the Ethernet to our Wi-Fi so that we could have internet. So that's working. Looks like everything is good. To be honest, this is pretty tricky stuff. So if you ran into an issue, don't beat yourself up. Try to troubleshoot it. And if you have any questions, well, you can just message me or something. So looks like, I mean, this is our view. We've got our all plugged in. Had the connection going through like that. Yeah, I don't think I'm missing anything. So that's it for this tutorial, and I'm sure there'll be more coming up later. Okay, thanks.